So again, absolutely loved Rebirth. I've been a fan of FF7 since the late 90s. So I loved and adored the game. It was everything I dreamed it would be. I want part 3 to maintain the direction that Rebirth took. Now, again, for those who may not be familiar, Remake took a direction with its ending, right? And when Remake ended, we saw that the characters were a little more self-aware than they should have been, and that things were a little bit different than they should have been. Not with the expansions, right? With like Chocobo Sam and Madam M and characters like that. Not with those sorts of expansions, but that in the sequence of events, certain things were happening differently, right? Somebody was tampering with the sequence of events in some way. The unknown journey will continue. So that's really what I wanted to discuss. The whole unknown journey will continue. Now, that was interpreted in a lot of ways by a lot of different people. Some people thought that meant, oh my God, the whole FF7 story is changing. Some people thought that meant, oh my God, this is like an alternate timeline. We're in a multiverse. Some people thought that meant, oh my God, this is actually a sequel to FF7. Some people thought, hey, this could be a time loop. Basically, the way Remake ended, it answered a lot of questions, like what the Whispers are, right? We no longer had any questions what the Whispers are. They were Guardians of Fate, the Whispers, right? So, but a new mystery was unveiled to us that was left rather vague. The unknown journey will continue. And of course, like I mentioned, lots of people took that lots of different ways. Now, I will admit that I, for one, entertained a lot of different ideas. At certain points, I thought it was a time loop. At other times, I thought it was a sequel. At other times, I thought we were in like a DC level multiverse. Like, there were times I entertained these ideas, but then Integrate came out, right? And then the cutscenes that came with Integrate, and you see the party heading to Calm, and then the Rebirth, and then the Crisis Core reunion comes out, right? And then the Rebirth marketing material comes out. More and more I'm seeing, I'm like, oh, this doesn't look like it's a sequel. This doesn't look like everything's going to change. It looks like a faithful retelling where they've created a narrative fluid enough to allow them to make certain changes. Not fundamental changes, but changes that primarily allow them to expand on the lore, expand on characters, expand on towns and settings and history. So again, that whole unknown journey will continue. We severed ourselves off from Fate. We killed Fate. Lots of people thought that meant that this scene was going to be different. The towns we visited would be different. Who the villain was going to be would be different. Who wins in the end would be different. A lot of these ideas were that fundamental things about FF7 were going to change. But again, with Integrate, Crisis Core, and then Rebirth, both its marketing materials and the game, we all saw, in my opinion, very clearly, what up, Lance the Master? We all saw very clearly that the fundamental story of Final Fantasy VII is going to stay the same. But that the changes that are being made, right, and them making room for changes was not to fundamentally shake the story to its core, but again, to allow the story to expand further out, right? So that Cissnei could be in Gungaga, right? So that Cissnei could be in Gungaga. So that Zack could play a more active role in the unveiling of the events without him interfering with, say, the path the party should be walking to the Temple of the Ancients and to the Forgotten Capital. They found a very clever way to allow themselves to keep things faithful to the original, but again, expand in certain ways that they could include the overall compilation in this sequence of events. Again, with the Integrate DLC. Dirge of Cerberus now gets introduced much earlier into the narrative. Things like that are what the changes were about, not about changing the ultimate outcome of the scene we see on screen. Whew. Now again, part 3 is still upon us. Part 3 is still upon us. So for all we know, things could be very different in the end. Maybe they were pulling our legs. Maybe the wool got pulled over my eyes. And in fact, things are going to be very different in part 3. My opinion, based on Remake plus Rebirth, it really does not seem to be like that's happening. But we'll see. I remember people theorizing Tifa would take Aerith's place. I had theories, and some people misconstrued this, but I had theories that Tifa was going to be targeted, that Sephiroth was going to be more aware how powerful Tifa was and how helpful she can be to Cloud, and that Sephiroth in particular wouldn't only single out Aerith, but would also target Tifa. That ended up being correct. But I never thought that Tifa was going to take Aerith's place in this scene. It wouldn't make sense. Tifa's not an ancient. The devs always said they were going to honor the original works. And again, as we see, it seems to me that what the remake trilogy is sort of a definitive version of the compilation. Not a definitive version of the original, but a definitive version of the compilation. I see some questions in the chat about this, but they know they may not have the resources to remake Dirge of Cerberus or to make an Advent Children game or to expand on the ideas in the novels. But again, what this trilogy is serving as is, again, not a definitive version of the original work, but a definitive version of the compilation. Because again, it's not just the games that are being referenced and being expanded on in this trilogy, but the books and the novels too. It's wild. Also, the expansion of Gi and Gin Attack was pretty cool. Exactly. And I feel like if Remake didn't introduce the idea of change, some kind of change, a lot of these expansions, I think people would have called it padding, which I don't think would have been fair. And again, my overall opinion on the ending of Rebirth, I thought the scene had its peak moments, but ultimately, I think the reason why I prefer the original sequence more is because I think this version in Rebirth left you thinking more than feeling. It left you thinking more than feeling. Whereas the original had you feeling much more than you were thinking. Now, a lot of us have picked up to what's going on here. A lot of this is to build up to what they're going to do in part 3, more than likely during the live stream sequence. But they kept things relatively a little bit ambiguous here, enough so that you know what happened, but that the full payoff isn't there. The water burial, which we'll get into today, wasn't there. They're saving that for part 3. However, I think one of the things they could have done better is a little bit more feeling, a little bit less thinking.